equity in cannabis, because I'm sure everyone here knows, can appreciate over the last 10 years or so of cannabis legalization, the legal environment hasn't exactly demonstrated equity and a recognition of past harms. And so this challenge is definitely a big part of my own research, and it's a big part of what we here at OT want to sort of build a different build an equitable cannabis culture where we can have these discussions about this previous environment and how we can build an industry that really seeks to move beyond, and also repair the harms of that previous, of both what happened before legalization and also what's been happening since. So I have some very short slides here. I'm just going to quickly touch on some key points. But first of all, we are organizing together. So this is me, Charla, and we have Charla's out over there in Michigan, also doing cannabis work there. But here in Massachusetts, I've been trying to, through my dissertation research, I tried to both look at how cannabis spread from different states, and also what the challenges and opportunities in Massachusetts were. And so I'm building through my work in Organizing Together, I'm trying to build on that and help organizations, help companies, help sort of the industry at large understand its role, and build on some of the important work that others have done. And I want to highlight in all of this, I'm going to try to highlight the work that others have done. I'm sure Grant knows very well what else has been going on in Massachusetts, and I've only studied what they've done. I haven't really been in the driver's seat of any of that, so I just want to lift others' voices up in all of this. Charlotte, do you want to say anything else in an introduction, or?
Yeah, sure. Well, again, thanks everyone for being here virtually. It's interesting working across state lines and in different areas of the country. So obviously, even without COVID, we'd still be meeting here like this today. But I'm really pleased about it. I founded Organizing Together consultancy group as a collective to help support and scale organizations' missions in a localized way. And so one way we're really focused on doing that is to focus on equitable cannabis cultures. As a lot of people, we've either studied it professionally, or we've had our lives impacted by the criminalization of cannabis directly. And so we're really interested in building out a program that encourages the cannabis industry to do right and to do restorative justice work in their communities. So today is going to be really interactive. As I said, it's live. I encourage people, and I'll be posting in the comments section below on Facebook Live, so you can go ahead and hop on and join the call if you're interested in discussing this topic. Since there's so few people here today right now, I would really like, if people are comfortable, to do a quick icebreaker and just go ahead and say your name and what brought you to the table today.
Sure, I'll start. My name is Grant Smith Ellis. I'm the president of the Massachusetts Cannabis Reform Coalition. We're a 501c4 advocacy nonprofit founded in 1989. We host the yearly Boston Freedom Rally, but independent of my work with MassCan, I was a graduate student in political philosophy in 2014 when I fell seriously disabled. And after falling disabled and going through recovery, I found medical cannabis that helped supplant some of my other medications and actually helped me transition off those medications back to a more independent life. Although sadly, I am still homebound and disabled to this day.
Anybody else? Any other participants?
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Dan Garrett. I am here because I'm a friend of Jeff's, and I like to see him do cool stuff like this.
Thanks, Dan.
Dan.
No problem.
Sarah?
Rita or Sarah, do you want to jump in?
Nope. If not, that's totally okay. Completely free to listen. So we'll go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, great. So first of all, this focus group here is intended to we're trying to push this out to everyone in the industry and to get as many perspectives as we possibly can. And this is really intended to help us improve our services, to listen in and to understand what's going on. Obviously, I can do all the research, I can do all the interviewing that I want to, but really lifting up the voices of the people involved in the industry and trying to get into the industry is really what's important. Here at OT, we've been doing a lot of work with restorative justice and people trying to get organizations like Last Prisoner Project nationally that are trying to get individuals that are currently criminalized for cannabis possession or sales out and try to help them restore their lives. And we recognize that these communities, the people that live in these communities have these unique needs, different politics, different economy. And so we want to understand this and we want to elevate these voices and this community. And so our goal here, ultimately we want to have multiple conversations like this. We want to build this out more, invite more people, and really be able to create programs and collaborations that drive equity in the cannabis industry. And it's both within this specific area of getting people into the industry as well as a larger, how to end the war on drugs overall and how to end mass incarceration and this larger paradigm as well. So recognize that there's two tracks here, probably more than that, but though that's sort of where we're coming from. And so we want to get the cannabis industry behind these larger goals of racial and social justice, and we want to educate folks on the larger social impact goals here. So first, before I get into sort of the lessons learned from Massachusetts, and I'm going to try to keep my thoughts here brief. And so if you have been deep involved in the cannabis industry and you've been really involved, someone like Grant, I'm sure this probably won't be a lot of news to you, but we will hopefully still be able to have this as a basis for discussion. So this is terms I've pulled from my dissertation. And so when I interview people for my dissertation, I really differentiated between the concept of racial justice, which was this larger goal of ending mass incarceration, addressing the harms of criminalization, addressing the harms of all that additional pain that's caused by disparate social policies, and the idea of social equity, which I viewed as a program for legalization to specifically increase opportunities within the cannabis industry. And so social equity is but one tool to advance racial justice. It's not the only tool. It's just this it's a recognition that the cannabis industry, that opportunities to this day are unequally, that there's not as many opportunities for individuals that have been previously criminalized. And so we want to advance that. And overall, both the idea of social equity and racial justice are trying to address this wealth gap. And so this is both material and societal, communal, right? The connections and the wealth within communities that have been targeted by the war on drugs is a lot less than those who haven't faced that sort of that criminal, the law enforcement scrutiny. And so overall, we're trying to just decrease the wealth gap and give those in create new opportunities for those in Black and brown communities to get involved in the cannabis industry if they want to. Of course, we don't want to push it to those who don't want to. So those are the terms I'm sort of operating under. Of course, some people can define things like racial justice and social equity a bit differently, but that's sort of how I've sort of set it out here. So I'm going to go through some very quick lessons from Massachusetts as I've seen them. I'm happy to hear others' perspectives about what they've learned from their state and what things have come after this. But the first lesson I want to emphasize is that legalization by itself does not create opportunities for those targeted by criminalization. So it's not enough to just say, oh, we voted to legalize cannabis, and so all the problem is solved. Well, no, if we look at arrest rates, if we look at who's getting licenses, if we look at who's getting these opportunities, we see very in a very real way that legalization doesn't solve the problem. It's just the first step in a lot of addressing a lot of other problems. So, you know, we want to continue working and we want to continue acknowledging this. So in here in Massachusetts, we, you know, the activists who put question 4 on the ballot did recognize that legalization wouldn't be the what solved the issue. You know, they certainly put the social equity lens into the conversation, but they, you know, they realized that there would be more work after that. And so that's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is dedicated revenue, and this is tax revenue, is needed to focus resources and create opportunities. And so almost every state that's gone before Massachusetts has seen a created industry where mostly it's wealthy white people who have access to capital, who have $200,000 in a bank account that they can start a business with, or even $1 million, or at least they can call up some friends that have a few $100,000 and put that capital in place. And, you know, it's great that those people have that ability, but that, you know, it doesn't recognize that the fact that there's expertise and there's this acknowledged market that's already been created in the, you know, the illicit market, or what we call illicit market, that, you know, we don't have any opportunity to bring these people into the industry, and many of them want to get in the industry. They want to create those opportunities for themselves. And so states like Illinois have gone beyond Massachusetts, where they've created dedicated revenue and they've targeted that revenue into opportunities for those in these impacted communities. And so, you know, this obstacle is one of both connections and resources, and you really need the resources in order to drive change. And so there's been a lot of proposals, things like loan funds, things like you know, the state of Washington actually had some loan funds, but there's a lot of resources that need to be devoted to this. And it's not enough, again, just to say it's legal and, you know, that you can go out and get a license. It's a lot harder. It's a lot hard, you know, for someone in Dorchester or Roxbury to get that loan, to get that business license, to access those connections, looks a lot different. So lesson 3 is that regulators can be valuable allies for social equity, but you really need leadership in the industry, and you need the ability to push change on that level. So, you know, you have someone like Shalene Title here in Massachusetts, who's really driven the idea of equity and who has come to personify equity in some ways. And, you know, she's been a really great speaker across the nation and in Massachusetts for advancing this vision of equity. But you really need folks in industry who are willing to stand up and, you know, be counted and stand on the side of equity. And so even here in Massachusetts, in the past few weeks, you've seen that many in industry have stood up and you know, fought against those who might try to, you know, for example, cancel or try to limit delivery licenses. And you had a major push against that, major pushback on against that, amongst both regular recreational you know, growers, as well as those in the medical market, who, you know, really faced a lot of social pressure to you know, resist that you know, the industry group that was pushing back against more social equity opportunities. And that's, you know, really create a learning moment in the industry, and a moment to reflect on what they have done and what they haven't done. And so that leads into my last point, which is, you know, any obstacles that regulators or, you know, even societally still exist between someone who wants to get a license in a community from, say, Jamaica Plain, Dorchester, Roxbury, Springfield, you know, someone who has the willingness, who has the drive, even has access to some resources. Any additional obstacles that you put in front of that person, even if you don't intend to put it there, so creating additional barriers for equity applicants to jump through, even if it creates a separate track, sometimes can by itself create an obstacle. And so it's not to say that, you know, those social equity tracks aren't helpful and aren't good, but just that, you know, we as regulators, as those who are interested in creating additional opportunity within this industry, we have to be very mindful of whatever making sure that the barriers to getting into the industry for those who want to are as minimal as possible, and that the invitation that we're going out and doing direct outreach to get folks into this industry. And so that's sort of the lessons I've learned from Massachusetts. Obviously, I could probably spend another 20 minutes, another 2 hours on this, but I'm interested to hear what you guys think about this. And I want to end with this news story I literally just saw from California here. And so this is actually a news story where they're talking about the gray market in cannabis. And so this is from California. And you have this situation where there are some cities in California that haven't really regulated cannabis in an effective way. And so this is from Los Angeles specifically, where there's all these stores where it looks legal, it looks like it's a part of the regulated market, but it's not. And law enforcement, rather than acknowledging that there's this imbalance, is going through, especially in Los Angeles, and arresting those who are operating the store. So these are mostly Black and brown people. And so you're essentially just recriminalizing, even where it's legal. Even cannabis obviously regulated in cannabis, or sorry, in California, but the people who are suffering or who are getting exposed again to the criminal justice system because some operators aren't playing by the rules are these Black and brown individuals who have traditionally been targeted as part of cannabis enforcement. So, here in Massachusetts, we also have some, gray market operators, and we haven't had as many crackdowns in Massachusetts, at least of arrests at stores and stuff like that. But this is the warning. It's the red light against potentially just solidifying the same societal structures, even though we have this nominal legalization where in theory we're creating opportunities, but we're actually not. So just want to end my time on the floor here, talking with some questions and really just opening up to the floor here and what people think about creating more opportunities and what the obstacles are for those in the industry, and understanding how we can build this culture within the cannabis industry to embrace equity as a real opportunity. So I would first start with this. What does social equity mean to you as a participant, whether as a consumer, an operator, whatever your role is in the cannabis industry? What does social equity mean to you? I asked that question of many of my dissertation interviewees and got such a wide range of answers. And so I always like to start with that, just to get on a common level, at least with definitions.
I'll give it a shot, I guess. One quick comment as well. I thought your presentation was excellent, Jeff. A lesson from Massachusetts as well that I hope really people take seriously, especially in the context of social equity, is if you extend local control to your process. So if you facilitate licenses by a state level process and a local process, you cannot just say the state level process has equity and that equity will mean licenses get reviewed faster, and then say nothing about the local process. Because that results in a gap that then it causes a breakdown, and equity companies fall behind in the pipeline. Better capitalized, often white-owned companies get through the pipeline easier. To your question, what does social equity mean to me? I guess it's hard for me to think of it in an individual context because I think of it as a universal principle. And I see it manifest the concept of social equity in a few different ways. Firstly, and I think most importantly, recognizing the disparate impact that the drug war driven by racial animus by those enforcing the drug laws caused in minority communities, and figuring out a way to design regulatory policies that, one, ward off centralization of corporate power in the industry so that that is not an obstacle to entry for those communities, and two, that gives sustainable and meaningful opportunities and pathways to license ownership. And I think, for example, in Massachusetts, we've seen a very, very good microcosm of that with the adaptation of the delivery licenses from an Uber Eats courier format that seemed designed to really just let brick and mortar retailers do all the deliveries to a delivery format that's more equity companies owning a warehouse doing their own deliveries. So I think kind of that is a microcosm of what social equity means to me. Creative and adaptive policies to engender meaningful participation in the market through ownership by those harmed most by the drug war.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that really in-depth answer, Gren. I appreciate that you know you've lived and breathed this as much as I have these past few years. Anyone else want to jump in?
Hey, Jeff. I'll let other people gather their thoughts. But I really like what Grant said about the local versus the state level. So when we talk about social equity, I think a huge component has to be like restorative justice, right? Because many people, particularly from BIPOC communities and rural white communities, have been harmed by the criminalization of cannabis. They're usually, particularly in the rural context for white Americans, those are the poor people of those communities. So they're still, they're actually the ones who cannot afford to be criminalized by the system because they already don't have the money to pay their fees. They don't have the money to pay for their time in jail. So essentially what it's doing is it's imprisoning them to a life where they're continuously trying to give back to the state. And it doesn't allow them to be able to even apply for a license. I mean, for a Class A license, you need to show that you have $125,000 of assets to be able to even get the preliminary license in the state of Michigan. Then we really need to be rethinking about that process and whether or not we're giving back to those who have traditionally been harmed when we really know that substance misuse and use is a mental health disorder and not a crime. And so I just really thought that was a really good point, that at the state level, we can't say that we have social equity at the state and then not bring it to the local licensing, because it's technically the local who will be able to adequately tackle social equity issues because they know their community best, not the state. And so I think we really need to look at how and where we actually push for social equity, because I don't really think that the state has the adequate capacity or the necessary understanding, being entrenched in as a racist institution, to be able to handle those issues. It would have to come from the community, and it would have to be coming directly from a participatory approach that engaged those that are harmed the most, so that they can determine for themselves how they think that the licensing should be done.
Yeah, excellent points, Charla. So when when this is just a reflection that I have, and I'm sure David, who's looks like is on the call right now, can appreciate this, is the impact of things like impact fees on the local level here in Massachusetts. That's just, it's just costs extra money, and obviously people here in Massachusetts are taking a look at these impact fees that are specifically charged by local entities, and there's really no accountability for them, and they just represent this extra barrier. And I've done some additional research on that, and just the gratuitous, in some cases, money grab that these locals are putting in, and just the obstacles that puts into the industry. And luckily it should be reformed soon, but that just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, I would build on that, Jeff. You and I have worked closely on that topic for a while. In time, I think policy does get better because it's borne out in communities, and we've seen this from a couple of communities across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, at least so far, that all the sort of sky is falling extra costs to hosting a cannabis retail operation, or any other license type for that matter, is just going to be exorbitant. It's going to cost the community that much more to host this. It's no different than hosting anything else that might have a little traffic, and that would include a Dunkin' Donuts or a grocery store or something like that. And in the end, the community from the retail establishment gets a 3% bump on the sales tax anyway. And some of our communities, like our Northampton mayor, has said, we've collected this money and we really haven't had anything to spend it on for extra costs. So we're going to discontinue it. So that helps make the case here. I will say one of the things, and I've shared this in past conversations with you, Jeff, and recently with on a call and on a Zoom meeting I was on with Grant. Part of the challenge of what I have observed in the Massachusetts experiment, let's say, for social equity, is that I think it wasn't written anywhere, but it feels like there was a setup that for social equity and economic empowerment applicants, you could go through the technical assistance, the training, the educational courses, and come out a graduate. Felt like there would be a big bag of money at the end of it to help you fund your business. And that was really never on offer. And that to me is one of the things I hear most from social equity and economic empowerment applicants. We need access to capital. And this is something that we're grappling with as a trade association for Massachusetts Cannabis Business Association. And we are not the other organization that was trying to sue the commission. That is not us. We have been foursquare behind social equity. We got behind the policy that the Cannabis Control Commission wanted to put out for exclusivity period for delivery licenses. And we want to lean into the topic. And I've got some calls coming next week with follow-up calls and not first calls with members of the commission. Some of them are new members of the commission to say, how do we tackle this? Because I think if industry doesn't play a role in this, no one else is going to fund it. Government, state government's probably not going to redirect revenue, even though they should. But if we can stand up as industry and sort of pass the hat or create a fund that helps get people up and running, I think that's what we should do. If there isn't a person I've met in the industry from any stripe, any size company, any license type who says, yes, the war on drugs was a failure. We need to do more to be intentional about how we help reckon with that. So I say, okay, then write a check. Write a check to a fund. Don't look for payback right away or don't look for payback at all. If you say you care about it, pony up.
Well, great. Thanks. Thanks for those points. And yeah, David, I'm glad you clarified. Certainly wasn't talking about MCBA there. I'm sure we both know that there's
No. Grant will tell you. I've the number of people who come at me and say, "Why are you changing your policy?" I'm like, that was never our policy. We're the good guys. We're on the right side of this issue.
I can confirm that. I do, Jeff, I didn't mean to jump in for your next question, but I do want to challenge the notion of only doing providing funds through business. I don't think it's wrong for a trade association or a business to run an incubator or have a loan fund for equity companies. But I also think it's important to mention Senate Bill 2650. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. It was proposed last year by Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, who's co-chair of the Joint Cannabis Policy Committee on Beacon Hill. It had support. It did not move through. It was proposed as a budget amendment. It did not move through as a budget amendment. It's actually been proposed as a budget amendment twice now. Once in 2020, once in 2019, once in 2020. That bill is kind of similar to what is actually proposed. All it would do is it would set aside 10% of the cannabis excise tax revenue, but not automatically, to go towards 0% interest loans for social equity and economic empowerment companies. The money would only kick in if there were donations matched by private businesses, public charities, whatever it may be. So the way the Social Equity Loan Fund would work in Massachusetts as proposed is the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development would oversee a fund whose contributions come by way of private donations that then kick in a match public donation from the cannabis excise tax up to 10%. Now, the reason I bring that up is, and I think David knows will note this as well, there were 5 areas in the Massachusetts adult use law where the excise tax revenue has to be spent. One of those areas is communities disproportionately harmed by the drug war. Last year, there was $70.6 million in excise tax revenue in Massachusetts. Of that $70.6 million, according to Naomi Martin at the Boston Globe, $0 went to communities harmed by the drug war. So I don't think it's a question of necessarily does the money have to be spent on a social equity loan fund? But I think lawmakers, if they could understand the issue, would understand that there is nothing more important they could do, in my opinion, than have the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development oversee those kind of loans. And what's great is that office is already doing it in other sectors of the economy, although they're more doing it in things like credit lending and things like that. So anyway, I totally support the idea of private incubators, trade associations creating loan funds, but I just think there is a chance the government can do it, and that's why I like Senate Bill 2650.
Great, thanks, Grant. I do want to quickly, and if anyone else wants to jump in, I'm happy to do that. But I think this question of capacity within the industry and within just the expertise needed to run these social programs is just an important variable. So like the in Massachusetts, every cannabis business has to submit a plan to the regulators, to the commission, to say we are advancing social equity in some ways. And so some folks are doing job fairs, some folks are doing donating to scholarship funds. The list is very varied and different. The main challenge with these efforts often is, even though they are done in good faith, some of them run them to check a box, but many others are truly trying to advance some form of social equity. But since the entire industry is doing it in sort of this scattershot way and doesn't necessarily all have the capacity or the expertise to say this is the best way to advance social equity, either for cannabis or just overall, there isn't really this coordinated effort. And I think one of the things I saw from my own work is just the need for further direction for this money. And so part of that could be a centralized loan fund. Part of this could be appropriation of money that does exist within it's already being collected. But the industry, I think, is in some parts, but just conversation has to continue. This is what I want to do. This is what I'm trying to advance here, is to understand how you can really use those funds to advance the wealth and the capacity to really build capacity, this idea of building capacity within communities that want to get involved in this industry. And I think there's ways in which I just saw a lot about social impact bonds. I don't know if that could be a way. There's certainly being done in other industries, but I'm interested in learning what others are doing in other industries and applying those models and trying to centralize. So anyway, anyone else who wants to jump in can do so.
I'm learning about social impact bonds now. You have me researching.
Yeah, I literally just saw a story about how I think not it's the company in Cambridge that does a lot of training on like assembly or something like that. I forget what the company is exactly called, but they do like coding training, and they're doing social impact bond work with another organization on a bunch of industries that are looking to retrain workers that lost their job from the pandemic job losses. And so I think that could potentially be, and that's just something I've noticed in the last week or so, but I think there's other models certainly that where the industry could learn, and I'd be interested in learning if anyone else has any ideas. Does anyone else have thoughts about what's stopping, what's stopping people, the industry, from implementing principles of social equity into their business? So I gave that example of, just obstacles to thinking about, just like a lack of coordinated effort. But I don't know, Grant or David or anyone else who wants to jump in, what stops the industry right now from implementing social equity?
I didn't. I guess I guess it's not the elephant in the room because I think it's the entire story. But the analogy I always use, because I love Ida Tarbell so much, is to J.D. Rockefeller and what he did with his oil refineries in Cleveland in the lead up to the 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act. And the story went there before J.D. Rockefeller existed. Independent oil towns existed all across the United States. People would put their money together, hope to get lucky and strike oil. And then what the legends don't tell is they would build towns around it, and they would own the banks and own the stores and etc. And Ida Tarbell's father owned worked at one such town and was run out of business by the practices of J.D. Rockefeller. And what he did was he engaged in a functional monopoly where he got the railroad owners to give him half price shipping rates until all the independent oil towns were driven out of business. And the reason I bring this up is that I think that's the mentality that drives most business decisions in America, and it's almost considered virtuous. So it's almost amazing in some sense, and I think the MCBA, David's Association, is one example, that in the cannabis industry, there are companies willing to stand up and defend public policy that may not necessarily result in the centralization of profit. I think it's astounding. It's inspiring, and I think it reflects although maybe not the very best of what corporate social responsibility is. I think it reflects a type of corporate social responsibility that has disappeared from the American Republic since like 1905. So
Thanks for that point, Grant.
I think another factor in Massachusetts on sort of two sides of the coin on the license caps, because there are license caps for ownership and there are license caps within communities. There's a gold rush to try and get into communities and win one of the limited licenses. And the license cap limit for any ownership group being capped out at 3 for retail. And now everybody knows what the rules are. They're finally playing by them as opposed to trying to be cute about it. Does allow for many players in the space. The challenge is the easier stuff has been plucked up, and the licensing has either already been done or well along the way, and people who may be sitting on that license or in process and maybe haven't cobbled together the money yet are finding themselves running out of money, paying a landlord that they may never move into the building because they're paying full rent or full lease price, and the process is taking longer than it should have. So it's sort of, our low license cap is good because it's not allowing for consolidation as quickly as it does in other states, for sure. And I think that's good, but you got to have your game ready to go in a community. If like new communities are going to open up, they're sort of coming off their prohibitions, so people need to be ready to go and have scouted that community in anticipation of it opening up. But if you're more nimble, you have a law firm, you have a real estate firm looking for all that stuff. You say, I found another one, trade out of your least liked or your least profitable retail, sell that to somebody and open up this one because this is a B plus or an A market. That competition still exists, but I do like the fact that our license cap allows for a lot of players, which doesn't let any one or even any 25 companies dominate the market.
I think that that's the issue that we're really experiencing here in Michigan. Without the caps, once one company moves in, they get their license and they automatically turn and shift, what they're working on to stopping everyone else from getting those licenses. And so they invest in kind of opening up these super PACs and these 501c4s so that they can push local and state level legislators to not allow any more licenses in that community. And so it's a really interesting dynamic where you have these companies and they're going in the community a lot of times, especially in our more rural areas, they're like, we don't want any licenses here. And so what they do is they say, let us build you a park. Do you need a new school building? Do you need this? And then they're pretty much, getting the legislators on their side so that they'll get the license. And then that money just switches focus to stopping everyone else from getting licenses in that area. And I think for specifically Michigan, that's going to be a serious problem. And that's why I thought when me and Jeff were talking about all this, to have this conversation about lessons learned from Massachusetts, because I know that there were steps taken there that we just didn't do.
Yeah, and I mean it's amazing. I think, and I can't. I've met some of the folks in Michigan who are pushing this, and there's certainly a constituency there that's really pushing, genuinely pushing for equity. But even here in Massachusetts, I think a lot of public officials, even those who might not have bought into legalization as a initial concept, I think are genuinely interested in seeing this goal of equity advance. If anyone here, I'm sure Grant may have been paying attention to this as well. The recent SJC hearing on Salem, you had justices in that room, or at least virtually in the room, that were really engaged on this issue and were really interested in how does equity work, and how challenging the folks in Salem to be like, okay, how are you really justifying this plan? And I think Grant, I'm sure you were chuckling to watching that hearing. And the folks in Salem weren't even really there to discuss equity. They were there to discuss just this idea of preferential licensing, and just more of, say, a traditional story of City Hall being City Hall. And those justices were still willing to challenge them on this idea of equity.
Yeah, and I chuckle for so many reasons. One, I just dropped a link in the chat that I hope everyone will watch. I don't know what she's probably going to be angry with me, but that's okay. She wanted it to be low key, but Shalene Title has started a low key podcast with a wonderful attorney by the name of Richard Young, who had done about 20 years of work in the transgender rights movement. And he is just an amazing human being. And him combined with Shalene, they do about 23-minute recaps of these different recent decisions and lawsuits. So the one I posted in the chat is her recent overview of the SJC versus Mediri case. And as you mentioned, equity came up tangentially in the context of the actual discussion of the case, which had to do with if a local city or town gives a special permit to an applicant and gives maybe even a license or something to an applicant, but doesn't give them a host community agreement, and they are otherwise qualified, does that denial of the host community agreement usurp the licensing authority of the Cannabis Control Commission? Now, that's a fascinating question in and of itself, but on another level, it was fascinating. There was sort of meta commentary, because folks who follow this, as I'm sure you all do, intimately on the policy level will know, in the fall of 2017, one of the first votes the Cannabis Control Commission ever took, it might have been 2018, related to the issue of host community agreements, was whether they had the authority, the commission, to enforce the 3% cap in state law under those host community agreements, the contribution to the local city or town. 4 commissioners voted that they did not have the authority to enforce that 3% cap. Commissioner Flanagan, Commissioner McBride, Commissioner Doyle, Chairman Hoffman. One commissioner, in what I call an extraordinary dissent, stood up and basically pounded the table and said, we cannot do this. We cannot allow these HCAs to be rubber stamped. It will lead to a cascade of corruption, undermine equity, and destroy any semblance of fairness in this process. That was Shalene Title. So you can imagine how Shalene Title, Commissioner Title felt, former Commissioner Title, when these SJC justices are saying to the city of Salem, this is an outrageous process. How can you justify this level of local control? And on top of that, explain to us why, if the city of Salem has not even given one local HCA to an equity applicant, why shouldn't the Cannabis Control Commission just deny every HCA coming out of Salem until you give some to equity applicants? And they couldn't answer. It was great.
No, that's the main question. I mean, like, when you're talking about social equity, like, we realize that there's money to be made in the cannabis industry, and we live in a capitalist society, so that we know this is going to happen. So if you're going to look at anything and call it social equity within licensing, like, you need to be prioritizing those who have been harmed by the criminalization of cannabis.
Can I just offer, I wouldn't be doing this justice if I'm not representing as the business association and a trade association and sort of a chamber of commerce for all things cannabis in Massachusetts. I can tell you the one thing that everyone needs to bear in mind, that when communities do pick winners, whether they have 3 or 5 or 7 or 10 or 20 retail licenses to give, I don't think it's that they don't care about social equity. They just don't factor it in a way that it's scorable in most communities. So therefore, it's not intentional enough, because intentions aren't actions, right? The other thing that they look for is if they look like me or they don't look like me and they look like a young Latinx woman, they would pick the one that has the greatest likelihood to succeed and is going to generate revenue and stay in business every time. So whether they make that judgment based on what I look like or what she looks like is an issue, clearly. They want to pick winners. That is a factor. That's a real thing. They are hardcore capitalists on this stuff. And if they have a couple of licenses and they're watching the neighboring communities ring the cash register, not only on the sales tax, but on the HCA, they want to get into that game. So that needs to be borne in mind. But Charlie, I don't disagree with you. It is not baked in at the local level for social equity, but for a handful of communities, for those of us that are in Massachusetts.
And we have processes to register as a woman-owned business, as a minority-owned business. We have processes in place at the state and the federal level. So to say that we don't have criteria on how to adequately track and measure what social equity would look like, I mean, is false. Really, I would imagine it is just not trying to look for that information, or trying to work with people who have been trying to bring that forward, because, as you said, it is a capitalist market and they want to ensure winners. They want to ensure that they're going to keep paying for the license, that they're going to keep getting taxes from that. Everybody has the incentive to just focus on the money and not on social equity. And that's why the government function, it either is a regulator for the benefit of the public at large, or it is a regulation for those who already have money and have everything to gain.
Yeah, and the incentive structure, to your point, with women-owned, LGBT-owned, veteran-owned, disability-owned, Black and Brown community-owned, SEEE in Massachusetts for shorthand, is if you can get far enough through the process, you get priority review. So you have to have your game really together. You got to look like you can be funded and maybe not be fully funded, and get to a point in the process where you can say, I have a ticket that allows me to be a non-general applicant in some way. Can I get priority review? And they say, yeah, we'll move you to the top of the pile. But your proposal and your application needs to be tight, because if it's got a lot of questions to it, you sort of linger for a while in that land of we don't know all the answers to questions we have of you. So that's where it comes back to, do I have a consultant and a lawyer and a architectural person to work with me so that I get through all that blocking and tackling, which is necessary for any applicant.
And I think it's worth just highlighting again Massachusetts here, where we hyper-regulate everything, right? That we have this system, that the legislature creates to sort of almost invent impacts on, for the HCA categories, right? We assume that the impacts are there, and municipalities can take all the money they want for it, but on equity, where the need is, I think, far more demonstrable than any impacts that the cannabis industry would have on the local community. There isn't that same essentially pre-baked formula to drive revenue into that. And so I think it's interesting, and certainly the debates that have occurred here in Massachusetts in the past, in the city of Cambridge, about the essentially existing businesses saying, oh, we'll throw $10 million at equity if you don't delay the licensing shows how impactful this is. And obviously that debate has largely ended. Hasn't really was resolved in the favor of Cambridge moving forward with an equity focused licensing thing. But it shows that when there's the will, there is the way. But sometimes the will has to be done by the right people, which is in this case the state legislature, and they haven't really shown that they have the willingness to really, some people certainly have. Some people are talking about this, but not the right people, perhaps.
Well, you can see me chomping at the bit to jump in. And it's actually because I definitely wanted to hear David's important point, because I thought it was very well said. But something Charla mentioned earlier was something I was going to bring up about Cambridge. So Jeff, you somehow read my mind and took us to exactly what I wanted to bring up, which was the nuance. So I followed this Cambridge case so closely, and I was actually on the ground in April of 2019 when the Cambridge Ordinance Committee met for the first time to consider its equity priority period. In fact, I know the ordinance so well, I know that the equity priority period is section 5.50.040 of the Cambridge Cannabis Business Permitting Ordinance. But that aside, the point I want to make about this is that, yes, Jeff, you nailed it. What happened in Cambridge was the city of Cambridge proposed an equity priority period that for a period of 2 years would only allow certified economic empowerment applicants to open a retail store in the city of Cambridge. The existing medical dispensaries, Sierra Naturals, Revolutionary Clinics, and then at the time Healthy Farms, which is now called Mission, banded together and opposed that priority period, instead suggesting they wanted to allow themselves into the priority period by donating to a fund that would be overseen by someone. Now, what tanked that fund was a couple things. One, City Solicitor Nancy Glowa intervened and said that the city couldn't require the funds, so it all would have to be voluntary. And second, on September 5th, through Councilor Denise Simmons, the dispensary said that they had a legally binding contract with the Central Square Business Improvement District to distribute funds pursuant to this deal they wanted to do. And on September 8th, the Central Square Business Improvement District sent a letter to the city council saying that no such contract had been signed, and they hadn't even moved beyond preliminary presentation. So that sank that idea. And instead, the city council in November of 2019 went forward with the equity period. What's really interesting, what I wanted to bring up, Carla, sorry for that long-winded introduction. Here's the nuance of that debate that really just shows how you can tell what a company stands for when policy is on the line. There's a section of Massachusetts state law that I love, 94G A1I, and it says that a city or town cannot prevent a medical dispensary from co-locating as an adult use facility. Cambridge wanted that 2-year period to exclude medical dispensaries. Revolutionary Clinics sued the city of Cambridge, and one of the court arguments they made in August of 2020 was that Rev Clinics should be allowed into that priority period because it's racially discriminatory to exclude them. And just the fact they said that in a court brief, and that they argued that the word prevent meant that the city or town couldn't delay them for 2 years for an equity period. By the way, the judges, 3 different judges, said they could delay them. It just shows that's what demonstrates when everything is on the line. How do you as a company respond? And some companies don't pass the test, in my opinion.
Oh, thank you, Grant. So I just want to acknowledge that we're nearly at time. So thank you guys for a very stimulating discussion. I'm just going to quickly move my slides here. So we don't necessarily have, I think, many operators here, but so I'm going to skip forward to our last thing, just to say that Organizing Together really wants, work with businesses, work with industry, both at large and on a systemic and on an individual level, to make social fund an equity fund that really creates change, right? And so we're interested in working with an individual business to maybe create a foundation, maybe work with their local community to really understand what their needs are on a deeper level, and also create these larger opportunities. Because I think as David and Grant can both acknowledge, it's very difficult to do this. The liability, the capacity, the logistics, just nobody wants to make the first move. And so not to say that we are we're right now we're sort of still, we're working off of what other people are doing, and certainly there's a lot of other people working in the space that are advocating for creating opportunities, and we don't want to push them aside, and on this we want to acknowledge what's already being done, but we're trying this, and I want to have further conversations, and also maybe just push it out a bit more, and we're trying to figure out how best to reach out to the industry and how to get the people, the decision makers in these organizations that were interested in this, and understand what their needs are and what their capacity is. So thank you guys for joining. I obviously don't probably have a ton of time for questions, but appreciate all the energy here and the recognition that this is a really important issue.
Yeah, you guys have been great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope to have you all back again for our next discussion series in a month.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks. See
Thank
Grant.
you. Thank you. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize we had a time cap. I wouldn't have gone so in depth. Thank you all.
It's very, very, very interesting. Have a nice night, guys.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Yep. Are you still recording, Charlotte?
1 second. I'm stopping now.
Do you want to?
1 second.